In this lesson, we're going to be finding zeros of polynomial functions using the rational zero theorem. So the rational zero theorem, sorry about that, says that if we take a polynomial function, put it in descending order, so the greatest or largest exponent all the way down to the smallest, and if there was any missing, we'd have to put zeros in there. If we take the last number, the constant, and we also take the coefficient on the very first one, so I got those in red and blue, and we write them as fractions. We take all the factors of 6 and all the factors of 3, write all the possible fractions, which are rational numbers. If one of those rational numbers makes my equation 0, if I put it in there, then it is a 0, meaning that's where it's going to cross the x-axis, and that means it is a factor of that. So this represents P, and let me do that in red since I started red. That represents P, and this represents Q. So we're going to list all the factors of 6 first, so it always goes first, P. So the factors of 6 are 1, 2, 3, and 6. The factors of 3 are 1 and 3. Now we're going to list all of the all of the rational numbers in fraction form, in simplest fraction form, so they have to be reduced, simplified as far as they go. We're going to do it as P over Q, and we have to do the positive and the negative of each one of them. So this is going to represent them. We're going to have 1 over 1, which represents 1. That's simplest form is 1. Then we'll take 1 over 3. So we take the number 1 and we put it over the everything in the bottom row in the Q. Then we go and we take the 2 and start all over. So then we have 2 over 1, which is just 2. And then we have 2 over 3. And I'm just going to stay in red there, but those would represent, the bottom ones represent your Q, and the top ones would represent your red one. Then we'd start with 3. So we have 1, 1/3, 2, 2/3, 3 over 1, which is 3, 3 over 3, which is 1, and then now we go to the 6. 6 over 1, which is 6, and 6 over 3, which is 2. Now we also have to, those are all positive, but we also have to do the opposite. So really we have 1 and negative 1, 1/3 and negative 1/3, 2 and negative 2, so we're going to list all those. So we're going to have plus or minus, positive or negative 1, positive or negative 1/3, positive or negative 2, positive or negative 2/3, there we go, positive and negative 3, and we already have 1, so we don't have to do that again, positive or negative 6, and then positive or negative 2, but we already had that once, so we don't need to do it. So those are all our possible rational zeros. So that means we're one of those, or actually it'd be 3 of them because our coefficient, so let's go clear up at the top. Our coefficient has a 3, the largest one, so that means there's going to be 3 factors of that. So that means there'll be 3 zeros. And we, all our rational numbers down there are possibilities. So we know 3 of all of those. We have plus or minus 1, that's 2, plus or minus 3, 1/3, that's 4, plus or minus 2, that's 6, plus or minus 2/3, which is 8, plus or minus 3 is 10, plus or minus 6, which would be 12. So we have 12 possibilities, and only 3 of them, if we put them in our equations, solve it, would give us to 0. So that's what we're going to try to find out. Alright, so one of my possibilities is negative 1, and I'm just totally guessing. I'm just taking one of those numbers, and I'm going to see if it makes 0. If it makes 0, that means if I would do synthetic division, my remainder would be 0, meaning it is a factor of the original equation, and which means it is a 0 in there. If I do not get 0 when I put it in the equation, that means if I do synthetic division and I get an answer, some other number besides 0, that means it is not a 0 and it is not a factor. So I'm just totally picking one and just trying it. So my equation was then 3 times negative 1 cubed, so I'm putting it in my equation, minus 4 times negative 1 squared, minus 17 times negative 1, plus 6. So negative 1 cubed is negative 1, times 3 is negative 3. Negative 1 squared is 1, times negative 4 is negative 4. Negative 1 times negative 17 is positive 17, plus 6. So that's negative 7 plus 17 plus 6, so that's 10 plus 6, so that is 16. Alright, so since I got an answer besides 0, negative 1 is not one of them I want to use. It is not a factor. It will not be a 0 in there. So I'm just going to pick another one. So to save some time, I've already found out that negative 2 is, so I put negative 2 in my equation, and it came out to be 0. So I know negative 2 is going to work. So now I'm going to use synthetic division to figure out the rest of my factors and my zeros. So since I know negative 2 works, then I'm going to find the other one. So I put negative 2, synthetic division. So I have 3 from my original equation, negative 4, negative 17, and 6. Once again, if you're missing one, you have to put a 0 in there. So you bring down the 3, and you take negative 2 times 3, which is negative 6. Add those together, so you're going to be adding, so that would be negative 10. And negative 2 times negative 10 is 20. And add those together, you get 3. And negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. Add those together, you can get 0, so that's my remainder. So my factor, or my equation is 3x squared minus 10x plus 3. It always starts with one less exponent than when your original equation. Now to find my other factors, I'm going to use the quadratic formula, which is negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Alright, I'm going to go to another page so I have enough room here. First, let's write our a, b, and c. So a equals 3, b equals negative 10, and my c equals 3. Alright, so I've used the quadratic formula, so I've already done that to save some time here. So it's negative 10, because my b is negative 10, and the equation starts with negative 10. And you can see I put everything in there. And when I solved them, I got two answers. So I had 10 plus 8 and 10 over 6 and 10 minus 8 over 6. And I got 3 and then also 1/3. So my factors are then negative 2, and what was that? 3, and also 1/3. So, as you remember from 8-4, I can write these as equations. So it'd be x plus 2, it's always the opposite, x minus 3, and x minus 1/3. So those are my factors. Those are my zeros. That's where the graph would cross the x-axis at these points right up here. Because if I set each one equal to 0, I get x equals negative 2, x minus 3, and I'm going to stop right here. So you can see that's where I got. So those are my factors of that original one. And like I said, you just have to kind of guess and test. Basically, just put some of those rational numbers, of p's over q, in your equation. And once you find one that equals 0, then use that. Go on to use it, synthetic division. Solve it. It'll come out to be 0 because you've already found out it's 0. And then use the quadratic formula to find the other ones in there. Alright, here's our next function. So it's 6x cubed plus 5x squared minus 9x plus 2. Our p is the 2. It's already in descending order from least to greatest according to the exponents. And I'm not missing any, so I don't have to put any zeros in there. So the p is the 2. It's always the constant at the end, and the q is going to be your coefficient on the very first term, which is your largest exponent. So I've listed the factors of 2 and all the factors of 6. So I start with the blue one and the green one, and it's always positive and negative. You have to do both positive and negatives. So 1 over 1 is 1, so I'm going to have plus or minus 1. I'm going to also have plus or minus 1 over 2, which is a half, and I'll have plus or minus 1/3, and plus or minus 1/6. Then I start with the 2 and do the same thing. So I'll have plus or minus 2 over 1, which simplifies down to just 2. Plus or minus 2 over 2, which is just 1. I already have that right here, so I don't need to do that again. Then I also have plus or minus 2/3. And then I take plus or minus 2 over the 6, which is 1/3, and I already have that, so I don't need to write that again. So those are all my possibilities of factors and zeros of my original equation. They don't all work. That's why I have to figure out which one's going to work and which is not going to work. All right, to save some time, I just tried some of those factors. I tried -1, tried +1, -2, +2, to see which one. I put them in my equation, my original equation, to see which one would make a 0. And none of those did. I finally found one. It's like I said, it's just kind of guess and test. 2/3, when I put that in the equation, my answer was 0, so I know 2/3 is a factor. So now I know that's one of my answers. Now I have to find the other ones, and I'm going to have 3 because the exponent is 3. Now I'm going to find out do synthetic division with that and find out the other ones. So I bring down the 6, then I take 2/3 times 6, which would be 12/3, which simplifies down to 4. And then I add these together, so that's 9. 2/3 times 9 is 18/3, which is 6. Add those together, get -3. 2/3 times -3 is -6/3, which is -2. And that equals 0. So I know, like I said, I knew that was going to work because I tried my equation. Alright, so I write that as a polynomial, and it's always one less than your original, so it starts with this x squared. So then I'm going to use the quadratic formula again, so my a is 6, b is 9, and c is -3. And I'm going to go to the next page to give myself some room. So I put my numbers into my quadratic formula, and now I'm going to solve that. So I have -9 plus or minus the square root of 81 squared, or excuse me, just 81, plus 4 times 6 times -3 is going to be positive 72, all over 12, because 2 times 6 is 12. So I have -9 plus or minus the square root of 153, because that's what 81 plus 72 is, over 12. I know that 153, 9 times 17 is 153, so you can see in the next step, the last step there, I separated those. So now I have -9 plus or minus 3 times the square root of 17 all over 12. Alright, now I'm going to simplify that. So I have -9 plus 3 times the square root of 17 over 12. And I have -9 minus 3 times the square root of 17 over 12. So -9 over 12, that will simplify down to -3 over 4. And 3 over 12 will simplify down to 1/4. So they both are over 4, and you can put the 1 if you want. You don't need that. So that's one of my answers. And then I'd have -9 minus 3 square root of 17 over 12, which once again I simplify that. So -9 over 12 simplifies down to -3/4. And -3 over 12 is -1/4. You don't need to put the 1, but you can. So there's my answer there. So 2/3 was a factor because that represents 0, and I used synthetic division to find out the other two. And now I have my 3 zeros, which means they would cross, my graph would cross the x-axis at that point. So those are factors of my polynomial. So those would be my answers there. So those are my rational zero. Using the rational zero theorem, I was able to find out the factors of those. So go through the equations, or this video slowly. Go back if you need to, and good luck to you. Bam!